So if you're anything like me, when you were first starting out your real estate investing journey, you probably read a ton on Biggerpockets, right? You went through all the forums, really try to understand the philosophy behind investing. And I think Biggerpockets has been an absolutely instrumental tool in so many investors' success around the country, right? I mean, it's probably been one of the most influential tools within the last 10 years for sure that's allowed the average person to really understand real estate and to really give the confidence to hop into the game. Now, that being said, I do think there's a lot of philosophies on Biggerpockets that I think you need to be a little bit careful with. And one of those things is that Biggerpockets forums and podcasts and all that, they all preach that one of the key drivers and one of the key necessities in real estate is cash flow. Now, I am certainly not going to sit here and say cash flow is not important or by any means, but I do think that that's such a heavy emphasis on the cash flow is actually not quite correct, right? And if you really want to look at what's caused so many real estate investors to truly create amazing wealth and really generational wealth, it's not the fact that they had a couple $100 coming off of every property, right? It is really the appreciation in value over time. And if you study the greats and some of the biggest investors of all time, you'll see that most of their wealth was created essentially in the appreciation of the asset's value. And I'm even going to talk about this concept from a very mathematical and formulaic perspective. So make sure you stick around for this video because I'm going to be talking about why I think this is such a misconstrued notion, why I think it's also super one-dimensional, and why you should really consider equity appreciation as just as important factor, if not maybe even more than cash flow in real estate investing. So with that, let's get at it. What's going on, guys? My name's Lior and I'm a real estate investor out of Boston. And as I said, I am super excited to make this video for you guys, talking about one of these Biggerpockets myths about how cash flow is really like the main thing you need to be evaluating when buying real estate investment property. But before I get into that, super quickly, if this is your first time on my channel, make sure you smash that subscribe button for me. I put out tons of new videos every single week talking about real estate investing philosophies, the BRRRR strategies, how to grow your portfolio. I give out some landlord horror stories and everything in between. So if you're looking on content on growing out a rental portfolio and truly growing out your wealth, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll be notified every time I put out new content. So let's get right into the meat and potatoes of this video. And as I said, right, I think one of those big myths, that I kind of really believe for a very long time, and I think Biggerpockets and a lot of the forums and podcasts really preach on there, is that cash flow is really like the key driver in a real estate investment. And the issue with that is it is a very one-dimensional way of looking at real estate, right? Because yes, cash flow is great. And no, if a property is obviously losing money every month, that's not something you want to own, right? Because what's the point of owning an asset if it's going to cost you money every month? You might as well go buy a Mercedes at that point, right? But that being said, evaluating investments just for their cash flow potential, I think is a very dangerous game to play. And it almost causes you to analyze real estate like a bond, right? I mean, it's essentially just something throwing off monthly yield to you, right? Without actually looking at some of the key benefits and key wealth drivers within that investment vehicle. And as I said in the intro of the video, after studying a lot of really big investors, talking with some of the biggest investors currently around Boston, where I'm from, and even around the country, one thing I've really started to understand is that true wealth in real estate is not derived from cash flow, but it really is derived from asset appreciation, right? And asset appreciation can basically come in two forms, right? You're basically sitting on a piece of property long enough in a market where over time the asset just naturally continues to grow in value. Or the second way you can do that is by buying something that's maybe distressed, needs some work, needs some sort of stabilization at a discounted price, and using, construction or some sort of systematic process to improve the value and essentially create equity spread in the asset. Now, if you really want to see the effect that the appreciation in the asset's value has on investment. Let's take a look at it from a formula perspective, right? So let's take a very, pretty standard formula that a lot of people use to analyze return metrics in real estate, the internal rate of return, or the IRR. Now, if you don't really know what that stands for, you don't quite understand it, right? Basically, in a nutshell, all an IRR is it evaluates the returns you get from a particular investment and evaluates all the cash flows you're gonna receive from that investment over a period of time, right? So, for example, let's say you're gonna buy a multifamily property for 5 years. Basically, what the IRR is gonna say is it's gonna analyze the different cash flows you're gonna receive every single year, right? So it's gonna start with, hey, how much cash do I need to put into the investment? Then how much cash do I make year one, right? Probably cash flow from the property. Year two, cash flow from the property. Until year 5, when you sell the property and make your profit, right? And it's basically gonna look at that and look at those returns and account for time value of money. And if you take a look at that formula and really, and we put it in perspective from this conversation, right? About why that asset appreciation is so important. If you look at that formula, right, and you plug it into something like an Excel sheet, right, what you're gonna notice that is even if you change your cash flows while you're holding the period, right? So let's say, again, you've got a 5-year hold period on a multifamily that you're gonna buy, and from year 1 to year 4, you're gonna make X amount of dollars every year in cash flow, right? Whatever it is, 20, 30, 40,000, 100,000 if it's a huge property. But basically, if you change those cash flow numbers every year, those are gonna have much less of an impact on your total returns than by changing the profit line on the last year at sale, right? What are the factors that are gonna impact that profit line at the year of sale? Well, it's gonna be what do you sell the asset for, right? So again, that's gonna be determined by, well, how much has that market grown by since you bought it and what is the property worth today? Or is it, that price is so much higher because you bought it at a discounted price where you did some sort of stabilization work, some sort of construction work, and really increased that asset's price. So if you change that final number on that IRR formula, right, on the year of sale, you're gonna see that is gonna have a much bigger impact on your total returns for that investment than changing those cash flows. So I know I just got super mathematical on you guys, but it's the same concept I was talking about earlier, right? Where basically, cash flows are important, but they are not gonna be the means to the end in terms of your total investment return on the real estate. And actually, one really big investor that I follow that I really like the way he positioned this, the way he explained this, I remember watching one of his webinars was, he said, cash flows are important, but they're almost the mechanism behind your total returns, right? Because for a lot of you guys that that invest in multifamily or commercial property, you know that the income that a property generates is going to be the determining factor for what a property is worth, right? Based on net operating income and cap rates, right? In the commercial space. So if you have strong cash flows, that's certainly great, and you obviously want to realize those, but those are much more important because they're going to increase the value of your asset at the very end. So I really like to think about it like that, where cash flows are certainly great, and that's something I'd love to, I want to experience on every transaction, but they're really much more important in deriving that means to an end, in increasing your assets value over time so that you can really sell at a high price and really maximize your total investment on the real estate. So, all right, so now you listen to me ramble on and on about why I think the appreciation and the assets value at the end is much more important than the cash flows. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, so what is the implication for me? So what are the implications of this? Well, 2 things. First of all, so if you believe what I'm saying, right, and if this kind of really makes sense to you, right, then it kind of necessitates that you want to invest in a market that's going to be sturdy and continue to appreciate over the next 3 to 5 years, rather than go into maybe lower class markets or cheaper markets that maybe can produce better cash flow, but might not have that same sturdiness in the next couple of years, right? So, again, I live in Boston, which is considered to be a Class A market, right? Basically a top tier market across the US and really across the globe. So when I invest, I know that in 3 to 5 years, I'm gonna have super stable and continuous appreciation rates that I feel pretty comfortable relying on. Now, if you don't live in a market like Boston, right? Maybe you live somewhere else, like, you know, somewhere in the South or Midwest, or mountain states, whatever, right? If you don't live in like a prime top tier market, then you've got two options. You can decide to invest remotely, right, outside of where you live, and choose a top tier market that you really like and believe in. Or you can buy in your backyard, right, and maybe not so much rely on the strength of a particular real estate market, but you wanna buy things at discounts, right? You wanna buy things below what they're worth, and you know, the way you'll find that is properties that need work from a construction perspective, or maybe properties that have super low paying rents and you can kind of increase rents over time. But basically you wanna find a way where you can increase the property's value, whether by the market or by your own doing, so that when you sell the asset, right, you're going to realize quite a bit of gains. And again, that's going to be one of the driving factors behind your total returns on investment. Now, in an ideal world, you probably are going to want to combine tip number one and tip number two together, right? Which again is something I do. So I invest in Boston, and I also really typically only buy distressed properties, right? Where I can go in and either perform some sort of construction or renegotiate rents, and thereby can buy the property at a discount and eventually increase the property's value over time. So I am riding both my local market, which I'm a strong believer in, right? The Boston real estate market, as well as forcing my own appreciation on the asset, which I think is ultimately the ideal situation. Now, you can do both, you can do one, you can do the other, whatever floats your boat. But hopefully after like kind of understanding the points I mentioned to you guys about why, you know, asset appreciation, one of the most important components in building wealth,